when I went looking for my late husband's gold pocket watch, the only thing I had left that still carried the sound of his hands, my daughter-in-law calmly said, "Oh, that old thing. We sold it. We needed the money for a vacation." Stunned by her words, I called the shop where she said they sold it, hoping to buy it back. The man on the line said, "Ma'am, you're going to want to hear this. When we opened the back of that watch, we found something you might not expect." That phone call would uncover a secret my husband left behind, and the truth about my own family. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. I stood in my husband's office, staring at the empty glass shelf, my fingers trembling against the edge of the frame. The spot where his pocket watch used to rest was just a square of lighter wood, untouched by dust. It sat there like an accusation, a silent reminder of what should have been there, Joel Connor's gold watch. Engraved for every second, JC, gone. Down the hall, I could hear voices floating through the house. Cindy's bright tone carried from the kitchen, talking about sunscreen and hotel check-ins. My son Nicholas answered with a distracted, "Uh-huh," the sound of a spoon clinking against a cereal bowl. The television droned beneath them, some morning news anchor talking about weekend travel. The ordinary noise of their morning made the emptiness in front of me feel louder. I opened the cabinet, checked the drawer beneath, then the one below that. Nothing. My heart thudded in my chest as I looked again, hoping I'd simply misplaced it, even though I knew I hadn't moved that watch in years. I walked into the kitchen doorway and said, as calmly as I could, "Nick, have you seen your father's pocket watch? The gold one that sat on the office shelf." Nicholas looked up halfway through a bite of cereal. "No, Mom, haven't seen it." Cindy turned from the counter, smiling like she was giving me good news. "Oh, that. We sold it online. We're using the money for our cruise next month." For a second, I thought she was joking. Then I saw her scrolling through pictures of beaches on her phone. "You sold it?" I said. She nodded easily. "Yeah, it was just sitting there. Figured you wouldn't mind. We needed a little extra for flights and hotel deposits." Nicholas didn't say a word. He just kept staring at the table, tapping his spoon. "That watch," I said quietly, "was your father's. He carried it every day for 35 years. Cindy shrugged. "Well, now someone else will get to enjoy it. You still have plenty of his things, right?" The air conditioner kicked on, and that soft hum filled the silence between us. My teacup shook in my hand. "You sold your father's time," I said finally, my voice thin but steady. Cindy laughed, still half looking at her phone. "We'll bring you something nice from the islands, Melody, maybe a seashell." I set my cup down carefully, afraid I'd drop it. Nicholas still wouldn't look at me. "I see," I said. Then I turned and walked back down the hall. In the office, sunlight spilled across the empty shelf. I could almost hear the faint tick that used to fill this room whenever Joel wound that watch after dinner. I stood there until the quiet started to ache. That's when it hit me. The thing was gone, but what it meant wasn't. And that's where this story truly begins, with a stolen watch, a careless laugh, and a mother who finally decided that silence wasn't the same thing as peace. 2 days passed, but the anger hadn't left my chest. It just sat there, quiet and heavy, like a rock I couldn't put down. Cindy and Nicholas went about their days like nothing had happened. They packed their bright new luggage and argued over sunscreen brands. I cooked my own breakfast, stayed in my room, and spoke only when I had to. That Friday morning, I was folding towels when the house phone rang. Hardly anyone calls that number anymore. Not since Nicholas convinced me to go mobile. The caller ID showed a number from Charleston, South Carolina. I hesitated, thinking it was a telemarketer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello, this is Melody Connor." A calm man's voice answered, Mrs. Connor, my name is Avery Holt. I own Holt and Sons Jewelers here in Charleston. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I sat down on the edge of the bed. No, not at all. What's this about? He paused, like he wanted to be careful with his words. I believe someone recently sold me a gold pocket watch that might belong to your family. It's engraved on the back, for every second, JC. Does that sound familiar? My throat tightened. Yes, I said quietly. That was my husband's. He sighed, and I could hear the faint ticking of something in the background, maybe another clock in his shop. I thought so. The young woman who brought it in said her family didn't need it anymore. I bought it for restoration, but when I opened the back plate to clean the mechanism, I found a folded note tucked inside. I didn't breathe for a second. A note. Yes, ma'am. It looked old, but carefully placed. Written in blue ink. It said, Mel, if you ever need a way to stand on your own again, go to Locker 118, First Federal Credit Union, Charleston. For a moment, the whole room seemed to stop. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Joel's handwriting had always been neat and square, the kind of script engineers have when they measure every line. Avery continued gently. I wasn't sure what to do, but I had a feeling the watch wasn't meant to be sold. My own father left me his service medal from the Navy. If someone ever pawned that for a cruise, I'd be devastated. I felt I had to make the call. My voice cracked a little. Thank you, Mr. Holt. You did the right thing. He cleared his throat. I'll hold on to it here, Mrs. Connor, until you decide what you want to do. The watch is safe, I promise. When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the phone. The sunlight from the window stretched across the carpet, lighting up the framed photo of Joel and me at our 40th anniversary. His arm was around me, that easy smile on his face. I picked up the frame and whispered, Joel, what did you leave me this time? That afternoon, I looked up the bank online. First Federal Credit Union, Charleston. They were open Saturdays until noon. I printed out the address, put my license in my purse, and laid my car keys beside it. When I told Nicholas and Cindy I'd be gone overnight, they barely looked up. Where you headed, Mom? Nicholas asked, still tapping on his phone. I'm driving to Charleston. I need to take care of something. Cindy grinned. Well, don't overdo it. You're not used to long drives. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. I'll manage. After dinner, when the house went quiet, I sat alone in Joel's office. The shelf was still bare, but I didn't look at it with sadness this time. I felt something else, a small, steady spark of curiosity. Joel wasn't a man who left loose ends. If he'd hidden something in that watch, there was a reason. He'd been practical, always planning ahead. Even when he was sick, he made lists, insurance, mortgage details, car maintenance. Maybe this was one more of his lists, written just for me. The next morning, I filled the car with gas, packed a thermos of coffee, and left before sunrise. The road to Charleston stretched out flat and quiet, the kind of drive that gives you too much time to think. I passed through small towns, Macon, Dublin, Statesboro, each one waking up slow. I thought about Nicholas, about the boy who used to help his father polish that watch when he was little, how proud Joel had been teaching him how to wind it gently, never too tight. Somewhere along the line, that memory had slipped away from him. Maybe from me too. 4 hours later, I crossed the bridge into Charleston. The air smelled like salt and magnolia. I found Holt & Sons Jewelers, a narrow shop with gold lettering on the window. Inside, the place gleamed with glass cases and soft yellow light. A tall man with kind eyes came out from the back. You must be Mrs. Connor, he said, offering his hand. I'm Avery. He placed the gold pocket watch on a velvet pad between us. For a second, I couldn't speak. It looked the same as it always had, except for the faint line, where he'd pried open the back plate. He opened it carefully again and showed me the small folded paper inside. My husband's writing stared back at me. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. "That's Joel's handwriting," I said softly. Avery nodded. "I thought it might mean something to you. I won't ask what's inside, but I'm glad it found its way home." I unfolded the paper and read the words. "Mel, if you ever need a way to stand on your own again, go to Locker 118, First Federal Credit Union, Charleston." A lump rose in my throat. Joel had written this for me, maybe years before he passed. I folded the note carefully and looked up. "Mr. Holt, I don't know how to thank you." He smiled. "You already have. You reminded me why we keep the things that matter." I took the watch, held it against my palm, and nodded. "You've done more than you know." Before I left, he walked me to the door. "Be safe on your way, Mrs. Connor. And if you ever need the watch serviced, bring it back. I'll take care of it myself." When I got back to the car, I sat for a long time, just holding the note. The letters were slightly smudged from age, but Joel's steady handwriting was still there, as if he'd just written it that morning. I touched the watch to my chest and whispered, "Guess you left me one more errand, old friend." Then I started the engine and drove straight to the bank. The bank sat on a quiet street in downtown Charleston with white columns and an old brass sign that read First Federal Credit Union. It was still early when I walked through the glass doors, holding the gold pocket watch tight in my hand. The cool air smelled faintly of floor wax and paper. At the reception desk, a woman in a navy blazer looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can we help you today?" I explained who I was and slid the note across the counter. She looked at it closely, then said, "Locker 118? Let me see if Mr. Harlan." She stopped, checked the system again, and smiled. "Ah, that box is still registered under your late husband's name. You're listed as the secondary holder. One moment, Mrs. Connor, I'll get the manager." A few minutes later, an older man in a gray suit appeared. His name tag read Thomas Reeves, branch manager. He had kind eyes and that quiet confidence of someone who'd worked in the same building for decades. "Mrs. Connor," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Joel Connor was a fine man. I remember when he opened this box years ago. Said it was for safekeeping, but wouldn't say what he was keeping safe. I'm glad you came." We walked to the back, past rows of safety deposit boxes, until he stopped at one marked 118. The metal clicked softly as he turned the key. "Take your time," he said, stepping aside. I pulled the small drawer open. Inside was a brown envelope, thick with age, a small leather-bound notebook, and a brass key on a ring with a tag that said garage workbench drawer. I placed the envelope on the table and opened it carefully. Inside was a stack of $100 bills, neatly arranged, held together with a paper band. My breath caught. I counted quickly, $12,000. Joel had never told me about this. He must have saved it quietly, piece by piece. Next, I picked up the notebook. The cover was worn but clean, the kind of leather Joel liked for his planners. On the front, written in his careful handwriting, were 2 words, contingency plan. I opened the first page. The handwriting was familiar, strong and straight, the same way he used to label our Christmas storage boxes. The first section listed our old insurance policies, his pension details, and a few notes about accounts I didn't even know still existed. He had written instructions beside each one in case of family emergencies. But it was the second half that stopped me. At the top of one page, he'd written in bold letters, family readiness. Below it, in smaller writing, "Mel, if they ever take advantage of you, use documentation and distance. Never guilt." I stared at that line until the words blurred. It was like hearing him speak again. Joel had always believed in being prepared. He used to say, "Love your family, but keep your papers straight." I felt tears welling, but I wiped them quickly. The last thing Joel would have wanted was for me to fall apart. I turned a few more pages. There were lists of contact names, our lawyer from years ago, the real estate agent who helped us buy the house, and a few phone numbers for people I hadn't seen in ages. Every page ended with small, simple notes. Stay calm. Keep records. Protect what's yours. In that quiet vault room, something changed inside me. The sadness that had been sitting on my chest for days began to shift. It wasn't gone, but it was taking a new shape. Joel hadn't left me helpless. He'd left me a plan. I looked back at the bank manager, who had been waiting respectfully near the door. "Mr. Reeves," I said softly, "my husband thought ahead, didn't he?" He smiled gently. "That sounds like Joel. Always prepared." I remember he said, "Time has a way of testing us, Tom. I'd rather be ready when it does." I placed the money, notebook, and key back in the envelope and tucked it carefully into my purse. Before I left, I thanked him for remembering Joel. He walked me to the door and said, "You take care of yourself, Mrs. Connor. You've got a smart man watching over you." Outside, the sun had come up fully. The city felt alive, car horns, the smell of coffee from a cafe across the street, a street musician tuning his guitar. I stood for a moment, just breathing it all in. On the drive back toward Atlanta, I opened the notebook again at a rest stop. The pages fluttered in the light breeze from the car's open window. Each line I read made me sit a little straighter behind the wheel. I reached the page where Joel had written, "Never guilt." I traced those two words with my finger. For so long, I'd carried guilt like it was a duty, guilt for saying no, for setting limits, for not being the easy mother. But Joel's message was clear. Guilt was not love, and silence wasn't peace. I pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon, long and steady. Somewhere between Charleston and home, I started humming. It was an old tune Joel used to sing when we drove to Florida years ago. I hadn't thought about it in ages, but the words came back easily. By the time I reached the Georgia state line, the anger I'd felt had turned into something calmer and stronger. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew I wasn't going to sit quietly and let myself be treated like I didn't matter. Joel had given me a message, and now I had a plan. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, the porch light was on. I could see Nicholas and Cindy's suitcases sitting by the door, ready for their trip. I sat in the car for a long time before getting out. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and for the first time in years, I felt Joel's presence not as a loss, but as a reminder. He hadn't left me alone. He'd just left me prepared. And as I looked toward the house, I realized something important. Maybe this was the test he knew would come, and maybe it was time I finally passed it. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the porch light cast a soft glow across the front steps. I sat there for a minute with the engine off, watching the house through the windshield. It looked peaceful from the outside, but I knew better. Inside, things had changed. That night, after Nicholas and Cindy went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the small notebook Joel had left me. I opened to the page titled Family Readiness. The words "never guilt" stared up at me, steady and sure. So I took a deep breath and started my own list. At the top, I wrote the date, March 22nd, actions taken. Underneath, I began noting everything that didn't feel right. The gold pocket watch, the missing jewelry box from the dresser, the set of silver spoons that had belonged to my mother, a few small withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing, $200 here, $300 there. I printed my online bank statement, circled the transfers, and put them in a folder I labeled documentation. Joel had always said paper trails spoke louder than emotions. The next morning, I took a trip to my bank. The teller recognized me. "Mrs. Connor, is everything all right?" I smiled politely. "I just need to check on a few recent transactions." When she pulled up the records, my stomach sank. Several electronic transfers had been made to a checking account under the name Nicholas Connor. I thanked her, took the printout, and drove straight home. That afternoon, I sat at the dining table again, going through everything I could find: bank statements, insurance papers, tax returns. Each time I discovered something off, I added it to the folder. I even took photos of the empty shelves, the missing items, and the text Cindy had sent about selling a few old things. By the end of the day, I had a neat stack of papers, proof, not emotion. The next step was finding someone who could help me use it. I searched online for a local attorney who handled property and family matters. One name caught my eye: Paula Wren, attorney at law, fair, firm, and focused on results. I called her office and explained what had happened. The woman on the phone said gently, "Mrs. Connor, I can hear how upsetting this is. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Ms. Wren likes to meet clients in person when there's family involved." The next day, I drove to her office in Roswell. It was a modest building with clean glass doors and framed diplomas lining the hallway. Paula was in her early 40s, professional but kind. She greeted me with a warm handshake and led me to her office. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" she said, sitting across from me. I told her everything: the watch, the sale, the note from Joel, the hidden money, the bank transfers. She listened without interrupting, jotting a few notes on a yellow pad. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Mrs. Connor," she said, "what they've done is more than disrespectful. It's potentially criminal. The unauthorized transfers can be considered financial exploitation, especially since you're the account holder." The word exploitation made my stomach twist. She continued, "Now, we can approach this two ways. One, we secure your assets so they can't access anything else. Two, we serve them with a legal notice to vacate your property. You're under no obligation to let them stay if they're taking advantage of you." I stared at the papers in my lap. "I don't want to hurt my son," I said quietly. Paula nodded. "I understand. But setting boundaries isn't hurting someone, it's protecting yourself." She helped me fill out the necessary forms to freeze my accounts and change the online access passwords. Then she drafted a formal 60-day eviction notice. Seeing my own name at the top of a legal document made my hands shake a little, but Paula's voice stayed calm. "Don't deliver it yet," she said. "I'll have my office handle it properly once we verify the documentation. For now, keep collecting evidence. Anything written, photographed, or recorded can help." When I left her office, the afternoon air felt lighter. I had a plan now, and plans gave me peace. At home, I cleared out one of Joel's old drawers and turned it into my command center. Inside, I placed the notebook, the folder labeled documentation, the bank statements, and the attorney's card. Over the next week, I followed Paula's advice. I photographed everything: receipts left on the counter, new purchases I didn't recognize, even a delivery box labeled Beach Essentials. When Cindy left her laptop open one morning, I saw a spreadsheet titled Trip Budget, Aruba. I didn't open it, but I took a photo of the screen from a distance. Joel's words came back to me: use documentation and distance. At night, I sat quietly in Joel's office with the notebook open in front of me. Each page of his handwriting steadied me. It felt like he was sitting beside me, reminding me to stay organized, not angry. One evening, as I filed away another receipt, Nicholas walked in. "Mom, Cindy said you're acting weird lately. Are you okay?" I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just keeping records like your dad used to." He shrugged. "You're always keeping records. That's what keeps things fair," I said, and he left the room. The next day, Paula called. Everything looks solid, Mrs. Connor. The eviction notice is ready when you are. I told her I'd come by in the morning to sign it. After hanging up, I looked around the office one last time. On Joel's desk sat the gold pocket watch. I'd placed it there after getting it back from Mr. Holt. The ticking sound filled the quiet room, steady and patient. For the first time in days, I smiled. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, about showing my son that boundaries weren't cruelty. They were necessary. I picked up Joel's notebook, flipped to the last page, and added one more line beneath his handwriting. March 22nd, actions taken. The plan has begun. And then I said softly to myself, Joel was right. You don't fight chaos with anger. You fight it with order. 2 weeks passed before I was ready to move forward. I wanted to give Nicholas every chance to do what was right. Part of me still believed that if I stayed calm and patient, maybe he'd realize what they'd done and try to fix it. But that moment never came. Cindy spent her days talking about their upcoming trip. Boxes arrived on the porch almost daily, new swimsuits, snorkeling gear, sandals. Nicholas helped her unpack, laughing like nothing had happened. Every delivery felt like a reminder that my husband's memory had paid for their fun. That Friday morning, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a courier handed me a thick envelope. Inside were the official eviction papers Paula had filed. I held them for a long time before sliding them into my folder. I didn't feel triumphant, just resolved. That afternoon, I placed the documents on the kitchen counter where Nicholas and Cindy could see them. Cindy spotted them first. "What's this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "They're eviction papers." I said quietly, "You have 60 days to move out." Her laugh was short and sharp. "You can't be serious. You wouldn't actually do that to your own son." I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm not doing it to my son. I'm doing it for myself." Nicholas came in just then, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's going on?" "Your mother," Cindy said, waving the papers at him, "is throwing us out. She's finally lost it." Nicholas frowned and turned to me. "Mom, this is going too far." I folded my arms. "What's gone too far is the disrespect in this house. You've both crossed lines you can't uncross." Cindy rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, it's just stuff. You've got plenty." "No," I said firmly, "it's not just stuff. It's trust. And trust is something you can't replace with a vacation." She opened her mouth to say more, but I walked away. There was no point arguing with someone who couldn't hear reason. That evening, after dinner, I asked Nicholas to sit with me in the den. Cindy was upstairs packing. The house was quiet except for the ticking of Joel's pocket watch on the mantel. "Nick," I began softly, "I'm not talking to your wife right now. I'm talking to the boy I raised. Do you truly believe this is right?" He rubbed his palms together, looking uneasy. "Mom, Cindy just thought, well, we needed a break. You don't understand how tight things have been. It was supposed to be temporary." "I do understand," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Your father and I went through hard times too, but we didn't take what wasn't ours. Tight finances don't excuse taking from the dead." His eyes darted toward the floor. "Mom, I didn't know she'd actually sell it until after it was done." I raised an eyebrow. "But you didn't stop her either." He swallowed hard. "I can't choose between you two." My voice dropped to a whisper. "You just did." He looked up then, his eyes wet but his jaw stubborn. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he stood and left the room. When the door closed behind him, I felt something shift inside me. The hope that he'd come around, gone. It wasn't anger that filled the space. It was clarity. Joel's words echoed in my head, use documentation and distance. Never guilt. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen for water and glanced out the window toward the driveway. Headlights cut across the yard. My stomach dropped. Outside, Nicholas and Cindy were loading furniture into the back of a borrowed trailer. Chairs, lamps, even a small table from the living room. I watched for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Instead of rushing out, I picked up my phone and began recording through the window. My hands were steady. Cindy whispered something I couldn't hear, and Nicholas hesitated before nodding. They worked quickly, like people who knew what they were doing was wrong. When they finally went back inside, I stopped recording and saved the video. I labeled it clearly, April 9 to 11:47 p.m. unauthorized removal of property. Then I slipped the phone into my folder beside the bank statements and photos. The next morning, I called Paula. "I have something to show you," I said. At her office, I placed the phone on her desk and played the video. She watched silently, then looked up. "Mrs. Connor, this is excellent documentation. Clear footage, time-stamped, with identifiable items. It proves they're removing property without your consent. What happens next?" I asked. "We'll file this under property protection and attach it to the eviction order," she said. "You've done everything right. You've kept your cool and built a solid case." I nodded slowly. I just wanted to be sure before I took the next step. Paula smiled slightly. "You're doing what most people never find the courage to do, standing up for yourself with grace." On the drive home, I replayed her words in my mind. Grace. That was what Joel had always admired most, handling things without losing your dignity. When I got back, the house was quiet. Their bedroom door was closed, and the trailer was gone from the driveway. I sat in Joel's old chair and opened his notebook again. On the page where I'd written March 22nd, actions taken, I added another line, April 9th, proof collected. I closed the book gently and looked toward the window. The sky outside was starting to fade from blue to gray. I wasn't sure what would come next, maybe anger from Nicholas, maybe silence, but I knew one thing, I wasn't afraid anymore. That night, as I turned off the lights, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. For the first time in a long time, I saw a woman who wasn't shrinking to keep peace. Joel had always said, "Mel, boundaries keep love honest." I finally understood what he meant. I went to bed with that thought and slept deeply, knowing that the line had been drawn. And this time, it wasn't just in the driveway. It was in my heart. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of Joel's pocket watch on the desk beside me. I had laid out every document neatly, bank statements, photos, Paula's notes, and the printed transcript of the eviction filing. Each page was a reminder that tomorrow wasn't just about property. It was about finally standing up for myself. I sat in Joel's old office chair, the leather cool against my back. His photo sat in a frame next to the lamp, him smiling in his Delta uniform, proud and steady. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "If I go through with this, I might lose Nicholas for good." The thought made my chest ache. At church, people always said a mother's love should be unconditional. They talked about forgiveness as though it were the only way to show faith. I could already imagine the whispers, if word got out. She took her own son to court. She must have done something wrong for him to treat her that way. Poor Melody, she just couldn't let it go. It stung before it even happened. I leaned back and stared at the papers spread out in front of me. For a moment, I thought about tearing them up and pretending this never happened. Maybe if I let them move out quietly, life could go back to normal. No lawyers, no judges, no embarrassment. But then I remembered how easily Cindy had laughed the day she said, "We sold it for the cruise," and how Nicholas stood there, saying nothing, and how I had found proof they were still pulling money from my account even after being confronted. I opened Joel's notebook again. The page fell naturally to where he had written, in that firm, square handwriting, If they ever take advantage of you, use documentation and distance. Never guilt. The words were plain but powerful. Joel had never believed in loud emotions. He believed in doing what was right and letting time settle the rest. I ran my fingers across the ink. Love doesn't mean covering for them. I whispered. It means teaching what's right. The tears that had been sitting behind my eyes finally slipped free, but it wasn't weakness this time. It was release. I picked up the final affidavit Paula had sent and signed my name at the bottom. My hand didn't shake. The next morning, I dressed neatly in a navy suit Joel had once bought me for his retirement dinner. Simple earrings, hair pinned back. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in years, a woman who knew her worth. At the courthouse, Paula met me outside. She gave me a reassuring nod. "You ready, Mrs. Connor?" "As ready as I'll ever be." The hearing was in a small courtroom on the third floor. The air was cool, and the soft shuffle of papers echoed off the wood paneling. Judge Renee Carter sat at the bench, poised and attentive. Nicholas and Cindy were already there. Cindy wore a fitted blazer, trying to look professional, but her crossed arms gave her away. Nicholas couldn't meet my eyes. The judge began. "This is a civil matter between Mrs. Melody Connor and the respondents Nicholas and Cynthia Connor. We will hear both sides." Paula stood first. "Your Honor, my client has provided thorough documentation of unauthorized property sales, unauthorized financial withdrawals, and proof of attempted concealment. We ask the court to uphold the eviction and restitution claims." She placed the evidence binder on the table and opened it to the section labeled April 9th, video recording. The judge watched the short clip, Nicholas and Cindy loading my furniture into the trailer. The room was silent except for the faint sound of the truck engine. When it ended, the judge looked over her glasses. "Mrs. Connor, is this your property being removed?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said evenly, "without my permission." Cindy shifted in her seat. "That's not true. We thought she didn't want those things anymore." Paula spoke calmly. "Mrs. Connor has provided photographs of those same items inside her home just days before the recording. She also has text messages from Mrs. Connor to her son explicitly stating not to remove anything." The judge turned to Nicholas. "Mr. Connor, did you read those messages?" Nicholas hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." "Then why did you proceed?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't think she meant it that way." Cindy jumped in. "She's being dramatic. It's all over stuff she doesn't even use." The judge raised her hand. "That's enough, Mrs. Connor-in-law. Property ownership is not subjective." Cindy fell silent, her jaw tight. Paula continued with the financial evidence, the unauthorized transfers from my account. The judge's expression grew firmer with each page. Finally, she asked, "Mrs. Connor, is there anything you wish to say before I rule?" I stood slowly. "Your Honor, I never wanted to be here. I love my son, and I always will. But respect isn't something you can beg for. It has to be earned. My husband worked his whole life for what we had. I'm simply protecting it, like he taught me to." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mrs. Connor. That was well said." She glanced at her notes, then spoke clearly for the record. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Connor. The eviction order is upheld, and the respondents are to vacate the property within 14 days. Restitution is granted in the amount of $12,000 for the loss of personal property and unauthorized withdrawals. This matter will also be referred to the County Financial Crimes Unit for further review." The gavel struck once, firm and final. Nicholas stared down at the table. Cindy exhaled sharply, muttering something under her breath. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just reached up and touched the pocket watch under my blouse. Its ticking was faint but steady, the sound of order returning. "Paula, gathered the papers. "You did great," she said softly. "You kept your dignity, and that makes all the difference." As we walked out of the courtroom, Nicholas caught up to me near the door. His voice was small. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at him, really looked at him, the man standing where my little boy used to be. "Neither did I, Nicholas. But sometimes life makes us face what we've ignored for too long." He opened his mouth, but Cindy pulled his arm. "Come on," she said coldly. "We're done here." They walked away, and I let them. Outside, the sky was bright, and the courthouse clock struck 11. Each chime echoed across the square. I stood there listening until the last one faded. Paula asked quietly, "You okay?" I nodded. Justice isn't supposed to feel good. It's supposed to feel right. I went home and placed the court documents beside Joel's notebook on his desk. The sunlight hit the gold watch, making it glint softly. I wound it once and set it back down. The ticking filled the room again, slow and even, like a heartbeat finally settling. I sat for a long time, just listening. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. And I realized then that this wasn't the end, it was the moment life started to make sense again. By early July, the house in Atlanta was finally quiet for the right reasons. Nicholas and Cindy had moved out a few weeks earlier. They didn't leave a note or say goodbye, but I didn't expect them to. The day they drove away, I stood in the doorway and watched their car disappear down the street. I didn't cry. I just breathed, really breathed for the first time in a long while. Paula helped me finalize the sale of the house. She said it was smart to downsize, that peace often comes in smaller spaces. She was right. 2 months later, I signed the papers for a modest cottage near Roswell, Georgia. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and it felt safe. The first morning in my new home, I woke early to the sound of birds outside the kitchen window. The light came through soft and golden, touching the fresh paint on the walls. The place smelled of coffee and new beginnings. I spent the first week unpacking boxes, taking my time, deciding where everything belonged. The last box I opened was Joel's. Inside were his photos, his old flight cap, and of course the gold pocket watch. I held it in my palm for a moment and listened. The tick was faint but steady. I decided to give it a proper place. In the corner of my living room, I made a small memorial wall. I mounted the gold pocket watch in a shadow box next to Joel's Delta Airlines badge and our wedding photo. Beneath them, I placed the note I'd found in the watch. "Mel, if you ever need a way to stand on your own again, go to locker 118. When I stepped back to look at it, the corner seemed to glow with quiet strength. It wasn't about grief anymore. It was about gratitude. A few days later, I received a small envelope in the mail. The handwriting on the front was careful and tidy. A. Holt, Charleston, South Carolina. Inside was a short letter on cream-colored paper. "Mrs. Connor, my father's service medal still hangs above my workbench. Every time I look at it, I think about how some things are meant to stay where they belong. I'm glad your husband's watch found its way home. Honest time always does. Avery Holt." I smiled reading that line. Honest time always does. It was simple, but it carried weight. People like Avery remind you that decency still exists in the world. That weekend, I invited 2 women from my church, Carol and Diane, over for tea. Both widows, both friends who understood that silence isn't always loneliness. We sat on my porch, surrounded by potted lavender and basil, the sound of cicadas carrying across the afternoon. Carol stirred honey into her cup and said, "I admire you, Melody. Most women wouldn't have gone through with what you did. It takes guts to draw a line." Diane nodded. "It's hard when it's your own child, but respect," she said, tapping her teaspoon lightly Respect is a kind of love, too. Their words settled deep inside me. We talked for hours about old times, about how the world moves faster than we do now, and how people forget what really matters. We laughed more than we expected to. It wasn't forced laughter either. It was the sound of healing. As the sun dipped low, I brought out a plate of lemon cookies I'd baked that morning. We shared them quietly, watching the sky turn orange and pink. When they left, I stood at the porch railing and looked out at the garden I'd started planting, a few tomatoes, some herbs, and Joel's favorite flowers, marigolds. The air was warm, and the world finally felt still. I walked back inside and stopped at Joel's corner again. The shadow box caught the last light of the day. The gold of the watch reflected a soft glow against the wall. I reached out and touched the glass gently. Sometimes peace isn't quiet. I said aloud, "It's earned." That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the sofa, listening to the faint ticking of the pocket watch. Each tick felt like Joel's way of saying, "You did it, Mel. You stood tall." The house wasn't empty anymore. It was alive with calm. A few weeks later, I started volunteering twice a week at the local library, helping older folks with computer basics. It gave me purpose again. I didn't talk much about what had happened with Nicholas and Cindy, but when people asked about my husband, I always said, "He still keeps time for me." Sometimes in the quiet hours of the evening, I'd glance at the watch and think of the journey that brought me here, a betrayal that became a lesson, a loss that turned into strength. One night, I sat down with a new notebook and wrote across the first page in neat letters, just like Joel used to. New chapter, July 2nd. Peace isn't something that happens to you. It's something you build, one steady decision at a time. I closed the book, took a sip of my tea, and smiled. Outside, the crickets sang their steady song. And inside, the gold pocket watch ticked softly, steady as ever, marking time, not as a reminder of what was gone, but of everything that still remained. That sound, that quiet rhythm, was proof that I'd survived, that I'd chosen myself without losing my heart. And as I turned off the lamp, I whispered to the air, "Thank you, Joel, for leaving me the time to find my way back." They say time heals everything, but I've learned that time only heals what you face honestly. Some wounds don't close until you stop pretending they don't hurt. It's been a few months now. Life has settled into a simple rhythm: morning coffee, tending to my garden, and the soft ticking of Joel's watch marking the hours. My home feels peaceful, not silent, not lonely, just calm. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about Nicholas. I still love him, of course. A mother doesn't stop loving her child, even when they make choices that break her heart. But love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It doesn't mean staying quiet while someone crosses every line of decency you've tried to teach them. People often say mothers should forgive anything, but I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what's right. It means letting go of the anger while keeping your boundaries firm. When I sit on the porch in the mornings, I often think back to the first day I realized the watch was gone. The shock, the disbelief, the ache that settled deep in my chest. Back then, I thought losing that watch was losing Joel all over again. But now, I understand he never really left me. He left me wisdom, courage, and the strength to stand my ground when it mattered most. I look at the garden growing in front of me, marigolds, basil, and a small row of tomatoes that are finally ripening. The sun warms my face, and I can hear the faint hum of life around me. It's a different kind of peace, one I had to earn. I still keep the pocket watch on my mantle, inside the shadow box beside Joel's badge and our wedding photo. Every now and then, I take it down and wind it gently. The tick that follows is soft, steady, and comforting. Joel used to say, "Time doesn't give second chances, but we can." He was right. I can't go back and change what happened, but I can choose what happens next. I can choose peace over guilt, truth over silence, and self-respect over acceptance. And now, I want to ask you something. If it were your husband's watch, would you have done the same? Would you risk losing your child to keep your dignity and protect what's rightfully yours? Tell me in the comments what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your stories. If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more real stories like this one to life. Stories about strength, family, and the kind of justice that comes from staying true to yourself. Don't forget to download this wonderful book called 38 Uplifting and Funny Short Stories for Seniors. Easy-to-read tales that bring laughter, memories, and mental stimulation. It's full of heartwarming, simple stories written to bring a smile, stir up memories, and remind us that joy doesn't fade with age. It grows stronger. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, peace isn't something you're given. It's something you decide to keep.